Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
I think we just found one deceased person inside a house. I'm not inside the house. It's closed. It's locked. I can't go in. But I see them. She's laying down on a floor from the window.
That 911 call from February 26th in Santa Fe was from a maintenance worker, and it led to what we'd learned was the death of legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, in their Santa Fe home, unraveling a media frenzy and some bizarre circumstances.
Yeah, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, they responded to the home and started their investigation. As Gabby mentioned, that media frenzy, the nature of the death, that really is what initially sort of raised a lot of questions about how the couple died. Hackman was 95, his wife Betsy was 65. As we learned about this story and sent our own reporters to cover it, journalists from across the globe also were descending on New Mexico, starting their coverage. All of us really trying to figure out what happened to the revered, and also, as we really, I think, learn and the story speaks to, the reclusive Hollywood actor and his wife.
So let's get right to our guests. We have Chad Brummett and Annalisa Pardo, both anchor reporters here at KRQE. Thanks so much for joining us. You both covered this story from different angles. Annalisa with the most recent body camera video that we obtained from law enforcement, and Chad, I remember that morning you jumped into the mix, headed to Santa Fe right away. Let's start with Chad. Tell us first your reaction to hearing the news, and then describe what you saw when you got to Santa Fe.
Well, actually, asking that question, I get a little bit of goosebumps because Gene Hackman was always one of my heroes. My undergrad is in theater. Coming from the world of acting, Gene Hackman, Al Pacino, De Niro, these guys were heroes.
Top of that list.
Top of the list. And I'll break that down a little bit later. But I remember waking up and seeing the alert on my phone. And it was this moment of, you knew it was coming. You knew at some point, he's 95 years old. But as details started to emerge, it was very puzzling. And yeah, I think like most people, he's a huge name in Hollywood, a legend actor of the stage and of screen. I remember that morning us thinking, we need to, get up there, and we were trying to figure out exactly where he lived. He was very reclusive, lived in a very reclusive area of Santa Fe. But it was shocking. It's one of those things that it's like when someone is sick and it's coming, but still when that moment hits, it's jarring, and especially when it's one of your heroes, right? So it was interesting, and getting up there and going.
Then you had to get in your work hat.
Exactly, coming here, and we were like, we need drone footage. So I went up, took the drone up to Santa Fe, and it took a minute to really try and figure out where we were, because it's a private area, just right off of the state road. That's all private drive. So even getting up and trying to get drone footage, we were restricted to the state highway. And as soon as you get up there, it's just a canopy of trees. So obviously, if you are reclusive, you want secrecy and privacy, that's the place to go. And it turned out, it was very difficult, but there were journalists, as you said, from all around the world. There was a couple from Germany that was there live casting and recording for YouTube. I don't know if they were citizen journalists or if they were, they were with some sort of affiliation with the Associated Press. I know there were a couple of AP reporters up there, photogs, and we were all just kind of waiting to figure out what was going on, Sheriff's Department, and law enforcement, obviously, they were very mum about where, which house was which, where we were going. They couldn't answer any questions, but it was surreal, very surreal.
Yeah. Before we get into more details about the death investigation and just like what we learned as the investigation started unfolding, I want to first acknowledge, like you said, why this was such huge news. Gene Hackman was one of the greats in film, a 2-time Oscar winner, 5-time nominee, known for his work on dozens of movies, too long to list here. But just to name a few, Unforgiven, The French Connection, those were 2 Oscar wins for him respectively. He was in The Royal Tenenbaums, The Poseidon Adventure, one of I have that movie in my childhood. Yeah. And Superman, I could go on, but I want to ask just our fellow film buff first. Chad, what's your favorite Hackman film?
It's Unforgiven.
Okay.
I think it is easily my favorite Western. It's in my top 3 all-time favorite movies. It is about as perfect of a piece of cinema, I think, as you can make. The acting, the writing, directing, cinematography, editing, story development. It is just magnificent. There's a reason he won Best Supporting Actor. There's a reason Clint Eastwood won for that film. It is just a perfect film. And what was always great, I think, about Gene Hackman as an actor is he always brought a sense of unpredictability and danger to his characters. And, you know, when you're going through drama school and, you know, you're going through various acting classes, there's always that we always talk about what's in your back pocket. What is your secret? Gene Hackman was a master at unpredictability, and Unforgiven is a brilliant example of it, because when you first meet Little Bill, you're like, well, he's a sheriff. He's on the right side of the law. He's doing good, you know, and he's kind of humble. He's building his house. He's not a great architect. He's messing his house up. There's no right angle.
The scenes where the water's dripping into the bowls, it's comical.
And he's relaying all of these stories, you know, about what it was like in the old days. And he's moving these buckets around for this, you know, this sort of, yellow journalist, so to speak, really trying to tell the true stories of what's going on. But there is this dark sense that just creeps in, and by the end of the movie, you hate the guy. And in the hands of any other actor, I don't know that they would be able to get that performance, but Gene Hackman he was a master of his craft.
Yeah. Very believable characters. I rewatched. Sorry, I know we're taking up all the time.
It's okay.
Film buff. I rewatched The French Connection recently because it's such an old movie. It was a 70s movie, and me and my husband were watching it and just like taking in the fact that like a lot of the things that he did in these movies had never been done before, right? I mean, there's some crazy car chase scenes and that had never been done before. He played in that movie, and he played a cop that was just so narrow-minded, like suspected that these people were doing wrong in the film. And obviously like that concept has been done a lot in film since then. But like you said, playing these characters who like, am I rooting for this guy? Am I not rooting for this guy? He's kind of like a scumbag, but he just played it so well.
Yeah. And it was the 1970s film, really, when 70s and 80s, when he flourished. You know, I go back to a 73 film that he did with Al Pacino, Scarecrow, which is another great piece of, it was just, there was a bit of theater that was coming in, because these guys all had a background in theater. You know, he did theater in New York for a minute, and, you know, then went on to Hollywood. But he also never considered himself, you know, a Hollywood star. He was an actor. He was, you know, he was the sort of the everyman. And I think that's also one of the reasons we loved him.
Yeah.
He was relatable.
They don't make him like Gene Hackman anymore.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Do you have a favorite Gene Hackman film?
I admittedly have not seen many of his films, but one of them that does stick out to me was Enemy of the State, where he played alongside Will Smith. And just I hit in on that word unpredictability, because you kind of see it, you know, front and center in his character in there, where, you know, particularly there's that scene where he talks about blowing up a building because Will Smith made a phone call, and he's just was, a really like electric kind of actor in that role. And he had a lot of versatility to the roles that he played. So, you know, one of the things I think that this story has really, brought out in our newsroom is the generational gap. It's real in our newsroom. We do have younger reporters and producers here, and you know, the day this happened, you know, some of the folks in our newsroom were not really entirely sure of the body of his career and his work, and you know, but that is part of reporting the news, is kind of bringing these folks up back into the forefront and talking about the work that they have done here. So, as I mentioned, I haven't seen too many Gene Hackman films other than Enemy of the State, also Superman. But as well, I guess we should ask you, Annalisa, any Gene Hackman films have come to mind for you?
Yeah.
Or you're like me, then maybe you haven't seen too many of them.
I'm embarrassed to say, especially in front of our film buff Chad.
It's okay. It's okay, Annalisa.
I am a representation of that generational gap that Chris is speaking of. I knew the name. I knew he lived in New Mexico, but I hadn't seen too many of his films. And I think, I may be a little bit more in the middle, like compared to some of our younger reporters, but still a representation of that generational gap. But am I inspired to go watch more, especially my partner? He loves old cinema and old films. So this is something that's
I
on my
recommended
list.
Annalisa watch Heartbreakers. Have you guys seen that? It's very lighthearted. It's a comedy.
Yes.
Okay.
But it sounds like it has very complex characters, and then he was so committed to the craft. So I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah. And I think another good one, and it's a very small one, is Young Frankenstein. He had a small role as the blind man in Young Frankenstein. And, he was like, well, is there any sort of role I can do? Well, Mel Brooks says, there's this kind of blind guy, and he just takes it. And again, it's a small role, but man, he made so much of it.
Such an
so
impact,
fun.
yeah.
It's really cool to know that too, like his body of work, like so many others, will just live on through generations and be studied, I'm sure. But yeah, big, definitely legendary character, made his home in New Mexico, like a lot of artists end up doing, which is also interesting.
Yeah. And admittedly, I've lived in New Mexico for 12 years. I did not know until he had passed that he lived here. I just had never come across my consciousness here living in New Mexico. And it goes to show you just sort of the, this is a place where a lot of folks go to sort of hang out and live their life undisturbed in many ways. Let's bring it back, of course, to the day where we learned a lot of this happened. Gene Hackman, as we had mentioned, chose to live out his latter years in Santa Fe. He had lived here since, I think, the late 80s. It was somewhere around there. His house was secluded in the hills around Santa Fe, specifically in a development that's up near Hyde Park. It's kind of on the way to Ski Santa Fe. In many ways, it was clear that the couple, though, valued their privacy. The first time we heard about the investigation, though, the day the news broke of his death, the sheriff's office, they gave preliminary details at an impromptu Q&A. They had set up a news conference about something else, and this news broke, so it was the perfect opportunity for reporters to then go and ask Santa Fe County Sheriff Adon Mendoza about what was going on. He had this to say initially.
It's not normal to find two people deceased in the residence. That's concerning. And then there was also a dog that was in a kennel that was also found deceased.
So yeah, I think based on the circumstances of what we heard from the sheriff in the beginning, that two people found deceased and a dog found deceased as well, I think people really started to question, the idea of carbon monoxide poisoning perhaps playing a role in this.
On our experience and working on cases like this, that is a possibility. Because of that, we called in the fire department, we called in P&M to go through the house, do some testing to figure out if it was even safe for our officers to go in.
Initial autopsy report shows no signs of external trauma. The sheriff's office has requested carbon monoxide and toxicology testing.
So the sheriff then referring to New Mexico Gas, not P&M there, but that tested for any gas leaks and carbon monoxide. Annalisa, to ask you, again, you started to do some of the reporting that we put together for our newscasts about this. What did investigators initially find at the home?
Well, initially, at first, I'm sure as the public had, the investigators too, when they showed up, had so many questions. This was such an unusual case to walk into. And they do bring up the issue, or not the issue, but the question of carbon monoxide. And they even asked, the ground workers who were working there, like, what is kind of the setup of the house? Like, can we go in there? Could it be a fuel leak? That's been happening slowly over some time. So those were one of some of the questions that were first brought up.
Well, yeah, I think the initial reports, they were saying that that his wife was in the bathroom. And I know that they had found some unopened pill containers as well. And I think that when they removed them, they found that, one was like a blood pressure medication, I think a thyroid medication. There wasn't anything...
over-the-counter pills, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Nothing nefarious, nothing, but obviously looking at that. And then Mr. Hackman was found in what they were calling the mudroom, which I'm assuming was something, just kind of off the entry, sort of go between outside to inside. And I think the fact that they were in two different places, and then the dog being in I believe it was a closet a kennel in the bathroom closet or near his wife's body, there were just so many bizarre things. They didn't see any evidence of foul play, but the placement of them, and as obviously as more investigation went on and they discovered what was happening, but that initial idea. It was just so bizarre.
Yeah, a very unusual scene, but obviously, as the sheriff, I think, just from the get-go said, there was nothing immediately sort of criminal that they had suspected. But yeah, a very unusual scene.
I think what I've learned from years of reporting and working alongside law enforcement is like sometimes it's not uncommon for a welfare check where there's 2 people dead inside for that to be something like a murder-suicide. But to Chad's point, the circumstances were so bizarre. There wasn't any evidence of foul play. The dog also was deceased there. So I think that just brought up so many questions of what really happened here.
Yeah. And also speaking to just having reported over the years, like you always have to keep that skepticism and never assume that like, oh, this is probably what happened because you could very well be proven wrong.
Yeah. And I think as we'll get to some of the details, there were some interesting elements.
Yeah. So even after that initial news conference and we heard from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's investigators, there were still questions left unanswered. But in a later press event after the Office of the Medical Investigator conducted autopsies, we did learn a lot more about the circumstances.
The cause of death for Miss Betsy Hackman, aged 65 years, is hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. The manner of death is natural.
Hackman's autopsy points to severe health conditions, including advanced Alzheimer's and other underlying health issues, which the state's chief medical examiner points to as the main causes for his death.
I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
Hearing that his wife died of hantavirus and it was possible that Hackman didn't realize that his wife had died, he had severe Alzheimer's and severe heart disease. I remember watching that news conference live here from the newsroom, and the OMI investigator was getting questions from reporters about like, you know, is it possible that he died because he didn't have anyone to care for him? And she did note that he didn't have any food in his system. What was your guys' reactions to hearing that?
I mean, it seemed, it made sense. Sadly, you know, I've had family members that had dementia and passed away, you know, from advanced stages of that as well. And that was my initial thought, was just that, you know, that she was his primary caregiver. She passes away. He's not aware. He doesn't know. You know, I know my family member, when she got late stage, she didn't recognize me, you know, and she knew me since I was born and didn't recognize me, didn't, you know, no placement. And so it made complete sense. It was tragic is an understatement. You know, it was absolutely heartbreaking to think of those final days, you know, and also I think all of us probably, you know, in various stages, also pet lovers and dog lovers, the heartbreak of this poor animal that, you know, probably died of starvation. You know, she probably took care of him, I would imagine. He's there. And it is just unimaginable tragedy, you know?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head of the tragedy that it is, and just knowing that we'll never really know what happened in his final days. Like, we'll never really know those details or what he was thinking or how he was feeling or what he was aware of and not aware of, which adds kind of an eerie element and sad element, and I think especially for the family. Hantavirus, I don't think anyone expected. That was a very interesting development to come out, and to Chad's point of it kind of making sense that she was his caretaker, and listening to the lapel footage of the detectives on the scene that day when their bodies were discovered, you hear a dog trainer who had come to the scene, who had knew the couple, basically shocked that, you know, they had both passed, saying Betsy was so healthy. She was his caretaker. You know, she ate healthy food. She was into acupuncture. Like, he was so shocked. And so, yeah, I think people around them were really shocked because she was so healthy. And everyone, from what I could tell, who knew the couple in that lapel footage, viewed her as his caretaker.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
Okay, also there were reporting about, like you said, Annalisa, we may never know about his final days because a lot of people have like surveillance cameras and ring cameras outside their home and inside their home, even in some cases. Did you get that impression that there were cameras inside this home?
Not really. No. And if anything, the impression was they valued their privacy to such a high degree, understandably. All the grounds workers and people who knew them was saying, like, we've worked for them for 16 years, and, you know, the number one rule is don't say our names. And so very, very private, very, very private.
Got it.
So one of the things we should note is that, you know, from what investigators, the medical investigators determined, they believe that Arakawa may have died as many as 9 days before her husband, Gene Hackman, had passed away. So yeah, we didn't give that number out specifically, but it was a large gap of time.
Yeah, at least a week.
That was there. And hantavirus as well. One thing I think we should note is the history of it here in New Mexico. Pretty interesting history going back to 1993. That year, there was this mysterious respiratory disease in the Four Corners region. So New Mexico, Colorado, and the other states around here, they essentially, that virus ended up being identified as the sin nombre hantavirus. 20 of 30 people who contracted the virus in the region that year died. I had family members who were here, living here in New Mexico at the time, and they just described just how scary it was, how serious it was, because it was this unknown respiratory virus that was killing people, and nobody really had any idea as to what it was. Today, you know, there's just better mechanisms of understanding what it is, how to detect it. We know it's also still pretty rare, aside from that 93 outbreak. Before Betsy Arakawa's death, the last recorded death in New Mexico from hantavirus was in 2023, in May of 2023. And it was the only case, or one of the very few cases, I believe, that year.
The only case, yeah, according to the Department of Health.
And Annalisa, did you learn from any later reports that Arakawa seemed sick to anyone she knew, or maybe tried to get any treatment or helped? Did you learn anything about the circumstances, about perhaps the days before her death?
The people who had contact with them last, which was about 2.5 weeks before their body was found, I mean, it had been a while, viewed her as in great health.
Got it. And hantavirus, we should note, is usually passed through like mouse, rodents, droppings, and inhaling some of that or in some way. So,
and I remember in that 93 outbreak, my parents lived in Placitas, and I remember that fear of, you know, I have always kind of had a phobia of mice and rats, you know, going back because of the Black Plague. But that just sort of made it even worse. And I remember thinking, because my parents live in a rural area, there are mice out there, there was real concern. How virulent is this? You know, is this going to come down? And so it was really scary. I remember it very clearly. That's why when this came out, when the autopsy found that it was hantavirus, it was really, like, I haven't heard that name in, you know, a long time. I haven't heard that virus in a long time.
Yeah.
But it was very scary.
Yeah, you asked me, when was the last time someone died in New Mexico? And I was like, I don't know. I did check with DOH, and that's what they said. There was one recorded death in 2023. Wow. So the dog that had died in the kennel, it came out that the dog likely died of dehydration and starvation. The couple, though, had other dogs on the property, right, Annalisa? What did investigators learn about them?
They had learned, so that dog, the person that identified themselves as a dog trainer had come to the scene, and I guess he had helped the couple train some of their dogs, and I think he runs like a dog care type business. He's seen, you know, you can see just here and there in the lapel footage, some of their other dogs, 2 other dogs kind of roaming the property. He's talking to investigators while trying to corral these other dogs. And he said, quote, you know, this couple was, quote, nuts about their dog. So they seemed like big dog lovers. There was a hairdresser that also knew the couple who had told investigators. They also had a small dog that would always come with Betsy to go get her hair done. You know, you would see it in the car window. So they seemed to really, really care about their animals. And yeah, it's really sad to think about that dog. And investigators had talked to one of the children of Gene Hackman, who asked that the dog that died be cremated, and they were still trying to figure out arrangements for those other 2 dogs on the property.
Yeah.
So we know in any high profile or really any law enforcement investigation here in New Mexico, the public can request body camera footage and investigative reports. New Mexico has a very strong public records law. All of that investigative stuff is public record. We did get some footage from deputies responding to the property.
A lot of the information that we do at the sheriff's office, unfortunately, it's public information, and it doesn't take them very long to figure out where this was at, the address. Once we start getting the media attention and all that stuff, then everybody starts wondering what's going on. I don't want nobody up here that's not supposed to be here.
Anything that he needed, she'd take care of him. But she was healthy, man. She got acupuncturist. Healthy foods, everything.
So, Annalisa, you had a chance to go through this footage. Tell us about what you saw in there and the story you put together.
So all the footage that we've been able to see so far is from outside of the home. Nothing from inside of the home, nothing showing bodies of the couple or the dog or anything like that. And we can get into that in a second, kind of what's going through the courts. But so this is all just the outside scene. And at this point, investigators are just talking with people who worked for the couple, people like the hairdresser and the dog trainer. And I think it's so clear from talking with everyone that knew the couple was just saying how much they value their privacy. And what also struck me was how much, and understandably so, law enforcement was trying to protect this scene and keep it limited, keep the knowledge limited. They were even telling the EMTs, don't share these names, don't share what you're saying, because once this gets out, it's going to be a media frenzy. And one detective even was talking to someone, you can hear him on his footage saying, we're trying to keep this scene as secure as possible. So just be really careful. We've already seen a helicopter go overhead. And even says, I'm pretty sure one of my deputies saw somebody order a DoorDash just to get close to the scene. So that's kind of what they were dealing with, trying to figure out what happened, trying to get in contact with the couple's family, and then also keeping everyone respectful distance away. So that really struck me. Yeah. And I think to that point that you can hear in the soundbite, they're advising the couple's family, hey, just so you know, everything we do is public record. It's unfortunate in this case, but that's the way it is. And so they were advising the family to have someone at this house once they leave the scene, checking in every day to make sure nobody's breaking in, nobody's taking things. And he was just like, I really want to advise you on that.
Yeah. And we should note Gene Hackman has 3 children, and some of his family are working in court to try and prevent the full release of body camera footage to the public. Tell us about that, and where does that case stand now?
Yeah, so they were asking for privacy. They don't want any footage, video or picture, lapel footage included, from inside the home, anything showing the couple's body or even the dog's body. A judge granted that temporarily. And then on Monday, we're expecting another hearing at 11 in the morning I guess this will air by then. But we should know by Monday if that temporary block will become permanent.
And what does that kind of speak to about just overall public records laws? I saw kind of some back and forth in the court saying this would be maybe a dangerous precedent to set to prevent, investigative materials from being released publicly.
I mean, I see both sides of the coin. Obviously, as journalists, we utilize public records so much, and it's helped uncover a lot of corruption or bad things happening in our state. So I do think it's so important. But on the other hand, especially as a daughter, you understand wanting that privacy, not wanting those images out there for forever on the internet too. So I see both sides of it.
I think that it can also get into that area of, when you talk about, for what is best for the public good, it's one thing that if this public record is going to benefit the public interest and it's going to help them, as a journalist, what good would it do seeing the deceased body of Gene Hackman and his wife and their animal? Is it going to add anything? Is it going to be of benefit? If it is, I'd love to hear why, because if what we are seeing really doesn't add anything other than shock value, then maybe we don't need that.
It feels a little exploitative.
Exactly. And I could absolutely see, and again, just thinking of someone ordering a DoorDash, that there are unscrupulous actors out there that may want to try and use that to gain hits on a website or to gain traction. And at the end of the day, remember, this is a human being that passed away in probably a less than, obviously this was unplanned, but in a less favorable light. And you don't want that kind of imagery. So I could see both sides. But then again, as a journalist, I'm like, it's not going to benefit anyone to see that. Mm-hmm. So I can understand from that standpoint. I would probably argue maybe not showing. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
But.
I mean, and we in our newsroom have our own ethical standards, and we never show bodies on TV or anything like that. And we do get a lot of lapel footage where it's like initial emergency responders going to a scene where someone has died. And, we always usually have to make that call within the newsroom. Do we air this? Does this have news value? But I think that argument, like you guys are saying, is going to be played out in court because it speaks to the whole idea of like, well, is this a precedent? Is this just, one exception?
I think the big question is going to be whether or not New Mexico's open records law allows for a carve out of, protecting some of the imagery here based on what essentially is preservation of privacy. I'm not sure that there is that carve out, but it'll be interesting to see how that gets argued in court. And yeah, certainly I think to the point, Chad, you mentioned there are plenty of commercial YouTube accounts out there now that just do this for a living. You get public records, post them on YouTube, monetize it, make money off of it.
And they don't care about the ethics in a lot of ways.
Can I say something to the broader effect of that? Just that it's on my mind. And on the flip side of that, sometimes seeing this lapel footage, we discover things that may have been done wrong, that could have been done better. And so there is that other level of, well, it can also help hold people accountable. And that's why sometimes it is important to see that.
100%. That you make a really good point, Annalisa, because the whole reason why New Mexico has these public records laws and why it is now required for all law enforcement in the state of New Mexico to wear body cameras is the argument that, we need to hold law enforcement accountable too. And they don't always do the best job investigating crime scenes. I'm thinking of the Alec Baldwin case. Again, that lapel footage was so widely seen and used in court. But yeah, it existed.
And I'm thinking of our corruption scandal in which you did a story where the officer takes off their lapel camera and puts it down and then does other things that are not good. So
it's important.
Yeah.
Accountability is important too. Yeah.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcast and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
The story in the case, I think it's a sad and it's a sort of unsettling end to a very full life for these two. And there's some interesting conversations about, bigger pictures, whether it's access to public records law, whether it's, just how you investigate high profile cases. There's a lot of other big sort of things that happened here that are just an interesting thing to study in our news gathering environment. But just to ask both of you, do you have any other thoughts about this case? And seemingly this is really just the death of two people, but it seems like there's been so much more that's kind of come out of it, as I mentioned some of those other elements from it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
First.
I think that there are so many different angles and so many different takes on it. Just coming simply from, I think, kind of the everyman standpoint. I knew I had heard for years that Gene Hackman lived in Santa Fe, and oftentimes it's one of those things you also hear, like Shirley MacLaine lives up there. So when you go
Cormac
up to
McCarthy was up there.
Cormac McCarthy, you go up and you're like, am I going to see them? Am I going to see Gene Hackman? And again, wanting to run into one of your heroes. And, I know later in life after he retired from Hollywood, he wrote, he sort of pursued that area as a writer. I think what made Gene Hackman so iconic was his humility. He was this phenomenal actor, and he could have had the biggest ego on the planet because of his craftsmanship. But he didn't. You know, he told Larry King, he told so many other journalists throughout his career, he didn't see himself as a movie star. He was a working actor. He was a journeyman actor, and I think that's why this one is so resonant. Not just that he had this prolific career, but from all accounts, he was a guy that really was about the craft. He wasn't about the sensationalism. He wasn't about being this larger than life thing. He loved what he did, and he lived that dream. And regardless if it's acting, if it's journalism, if it's carpentry, whatever it is, he lived his dream life. And I think that that's something that people can look to and be inspired by. And it makes it his loss all the more tragic. But at the end of the day, we're fortunate that you could sit down and watch The French Connection. You can rediscover this man's body of work, because it is vast, it is diverse. He is funny. He's terrifying. He's intense. He's jovial. And as we said at the beginning, there will never be another Gene Hackman. There will, thank God in many ways, because he broke the bar in so many ways, but there will never be another Gene Hackman.
Well said, Chad.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
fanboying out. Sorry.
No.
That's great.
Mine is more, I guess, from a journalistic perspective. Just, the public interest. Even when this broke, I had friends and family in California and across the country texting me, asking what I knew, et cetera. And so I think it's really brought, for me, and especially in the midst of what's going through the courts in terms of what can be public record, what can't, and our own newsroom, ethics and what we do and what we don't show, it's really brought to the forefront for me just that balance as a journalist of covering this and knowing that there's public interest and getting answers matters, but also doing it in a compassionate way and remembering this was a father, a husband, and just a really great person. And so for me, it's just brought up a lot of balancing it as a journalist and as a compassionate one.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. We really appreciate all the work you guys do. If you haven't seen their work, I highly recommend just going out to KRQE.com. If you click Meet the Team, you can click on Chad Brummett and Annalisa Pardo, respectively, and see some of the work that they're putting together. It's really great stuff. Thank you both for joining us.
Well, I think what we should do is have a sequel to this episode after you have seen Unforgiven, French Connection. Because I want your 2 cents on what you think of the man after you get more familiar with his work.
I am excited, and I need a push. I just watch the same movie over and over again.
I'm the same.
It's going to be Grease over and over again. So I'm excited to delve into his work and learn more about him and learn, the impact that he's had on culture and storytelling and filmmaking.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Chad and Annalisa for joining us to break down this case and also just to talk about Gene Hackman's work. Chad had the idea of doing a sequel after Annalisa has seen a few films. Maybe that's a whole other podcast series that we should do, just talking movies, because it's fun.
Let us know. We obviously cover a lot of news topics on here, but, there are other things that are of interest to us in our lives. And if you want to hear more, maybe we'll put together a bonus episode sometimes. Who knows?
Shoot us a message.
Yeah. If you have any ideas, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee@krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm gabrielle.burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media. To watch the full version of this podcast, head to our KRQE YouTube channel and krqe.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening.